begin to imagine what Mary did and didn't know. A week or two ago, Caitlin and I were driving back from her piano lesson. And on the radio, CHFI, which plays Christmas music all the time, in case you haven't had Christmas music, there was a story about a scientist, a musicologist, who decided that he wanted to compose the perfect Christmas song. So what he did is he analyzed 200 of the most popular Christmas songs to find out what you needed to have in this perfect Christmas song. And he came up with a few things. He said, he found that it was important to use words like Santa, snow, home, peace, and love in the lyrics. But it was especially important, of course, to use the word Christmas itself. The song needed to be in a major key, and it needed to have a tempo of 115 beats per minute, and feature plenty of sleigh bells. And you'd have the perfect Christmas song. And he used all those components. He came up with a song called Love's Not Just for Christmas. And if you're interested in hearing the perfect Christmas song, look it up on YouTube. It's available there. But when they played the song, I was amazed that, and I guess I shouldn't have been terribly surprised, that it really just sounded like 200 other Christmas songs. It was so familiar. It was so, I don't know what was perfect about it. It was just like, But the thing that really struck me was not just the ordinariness of this so-called perfect song, but was the things that he said that the perfect song had to have. Lots of mention of Santa and all that kind of stuff. But he did not say that the perfect Christmas song had to make any mention of the birth of Christ. And I was really struck by that. Because then what's Christmas all about? It's like the song, it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? I mean, most of us love Christmas. It's great. It's exciting. We like the lights. We like the celebration. We love all that kind of stuff. We love when kettles and toy distribution are done, right? How many days till Christmas Eve? I love Christmas Eve. I hope you guys have just been holding out, because Christmas Eve here is very special. It's a very participatory time, where we get to share our own expression of our love for Christ and what it means to us. So sign up, get out there. Whether it's singing a song, telling a story, reading a poem, whatever it is, anything goes. As long as it's Christ-centered, we want to honor Him. But what makes it the most wonderful time of the year? There's no mention in that song of the birth of Christ either. And that theme seems to happen over and over again. I love the Grinch. Anybody here love how the Grinch stole Christmas? And the great lesson the Grinch learns at the end is that maybe, just maybe, Christmas can't be bought in a store. Maybe it means just a little bit more. But they never say what. What is it? What's the little bit more? If you take Christ out of Christmas, all you're left with is this funny old man dressed in a weird red suit, traveling around the world magically, delivering presents to people for no apparent reason. Well, why is he even doing it? It doesn't make any sense. There has to be a reason for Christmas. And we know, and that's why we celebrate, that Christmas is about Jesus. And if you take Jesus out of Christmas, there's just nothing left. Right? Well, as we've said, we've been going through the Christmas experience in in our Bible studies these last few weeks. And it really has been for the purpose of refocusing our minds on Christ. But not just about Jesus, because there's a lot that goes on in this Christmas story. And there's a lot to be learned, not just from Jesus himself, but from the other people who are involved in the story. And I want to share some of the lessons that we've learned over these 6 weeks to help you just see a little bit more about what we can learn about Christmas. I'm not going to focus so much on Jesus himself today, but I'm going to look at that next week. I want us to look at some of the other things that we can learn from this Christmas story. I have a Bible here. Someone's going to hand me a Bible. I meant to bring it with me and I left it on my chair. Thank you. Luke chapter 2. We're so familiar with it. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. And this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over the flocks at night. And the angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. The angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born. He's Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men on whom his favor rests." That story is so familiar to us, isn't it? It's so familiar. But I'm not sure we always get the picture that God is doing something really weird here. Really strange. Really different. Really, in a lot of ways, uncomfortable. See, we've taken Christmas and we've sanitized it, and we've made it into a Christmas card, Christmas carol thing that packages up so easily. We've lost sight of some of the things. I was, for example, I was looking at pictures on the internet, and I was thinking that the Church of the Nativity. Now, we don't really know where Jesus was born, but at best and tradition says he was born in a cave, which was being used as a stable for animals. And you can watch the video, the Christmas Experience videos, what's a stable like? And when they go in there, in the video it shows them, they got to lie down, and what's the first thing that Joseph's got to do? He's got to take a pitchfork, and he's got to clean up, let's say. You know what I mean. We don't associate that there's sheep manure where Jesus had to be born. We like it clean. We like the idea of a big fancy cathedral built there. And that's what it is. Now, it's not a cave, it's a cathedral. But that's not God's way. That's not God's way. Some of the lessons that we learn. The first thing we learn is that God has his own timing. And his timing is sometimes for us very uncomfortable. Have you ever heard somebody say, what difference does something make to me that happened 2,000 years ago? Have you ever heard anybody say that? That how is Christianity relevant? That he lived 2,000 years ago. How can that make a difference to me today? I've heard that. And I got to thinking about, why does 2,000 years make a difference? Anybody here appreciate You know? Now, I have no idea who invented the wheel. Let's call him Jack. Okay, just for convenience. We'll call him Jack. Now, I was reading about the invention of the wheel. And it had happened about 5,500 years ago, they estimate. You know, and we think of the wheel as being something that's so simple and so basic. But so why did it take so long in human history before it was actually invented? Because it's actually pretty complicated for ancient technology. But you see, the fact that it's a 5,000-year-old invention doesn't make it irrelevant. And do we care about Jack, who invented the wheel? Of course we do. Why? Because the effect of Jack's invention is still important to us today. If we didn't have the wheel today, we wouldn't have the world that we live in, right? So it doesn't matter whether it was 5,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or 200 years ago, or the day before yesterday. What matters is the impact that a person's life makes. When you went to high school, did you read about Shakespeare? Did you do Shakespeare? Of course you did. But Shakespeare lived how long ago? Do we care? It doesn't matter. It's important. It's important. So the question would be, when we look at the birth of Jesus, and the timing is, when would be too early and when would be too late? You know, it seems that if Jesus came to save the world, the earlier that he came, the better. Doesn't that make sense? Because, you know, just the fact that Jesus only came 2,000 years ago, what about all the people who lived before him, who didn't get the benefit of Jesus' life? So wouldn't it make sense in some ways for Jesus to have come even earlier to accomplish his purposes? You know, even before the wheel? But God knows the right time. Because if you look at the history of the world and the things that were going on in the world, 2,000 years ago was in some ways ideal. So you didn't want to wait too long and forget all those people. But it was right around that period of time when Jesus was born that the world was actually ready to receive a Savior. You see, finally, most of the known world, most of the world that we think of, I mean, obviously it was China and India, but the Mediterranean world was finally united under one rule. The Romans controlled the entire Mediterranean part of the world. And they built roads that connected. And people could travel in ways that they had never done before. They'd never been able to travel before the way they did. And not only could they travel on these roads, but it was actually safe to do it. Because of something that was known as the Pax Romana. You know, the Romans basically policed those roads. So when Paul eventually would leave and want to preach the gospel, he could actually get there safely. But not only did they have roads connecting them, it was the first time in human history that they had a common language. You see, we think about the world, you know, and we travel to Europe and we get to struggle with, like, okay, I only speak English. If I'm going to go to France, do I speak French? If I go to Greece, do I speak Greek? If I go to Italy, do I speak Italian? But at that time, the world had a common language. Everyone spoke Greek. They had their own native language, but the world was united because of Alexander the Great with the Greek language. And that's why the Bible is written in Greek, in the New Testament, because that was the language of the world. Everybody could read it, or at least someone could read it to them. And not only did they speak that common language, it was only around that period of time when the whole world actually had access to the Bible, or at least what was the Bible then, what we call the Old Testament. See, if you lived in Greece, if you lived in what we'll call Italy now, of course, you wouldn't speak Hebrew, you wouldn't read Hebrew that the Old Testament was written in. But it wasn't long before this time that, because the world had been united and people had been spread out, that the Bible had been translated into Greek. Everybody had access to it. Everybody could read or could have read to them the stories of Jesus and the prophecies of Jesus. All these things came together that this was the first time that it was actually going to be possible to spread the good news about Jesus. If Jesus had come much earlier than when he did, he would have died a poor carpenter in an isolated part of the world that nobody ever would have heard of him. Wouldn't have accomplished very much, would he? Even if he rose again, nobody else would have ever heard of him. But God knew what he was doing. The Bible says in Galatians 4:4, it says, "But when the right time came, God sent his Son into the world. A woman gave birth to him, and he came under the control of God's laws. Just the right time." Sometimes we struggle with the idea of God's timing. We want things to happen now, right? You know that. You want it to happen now. God, I need this, and I need it now. It's like the great prayer, God, give me patience and give it to me now. And we can't understand why God waits for things. There are people suffering. God, do something about it now. Why should people wait? Why should they have to endure this? God, if you can do something about it now. I'll touch on that in a minute. But God knows the right time. Because, you see, God sees a whole lot bigger picture than you and I do. I mean, I barely can keep control of my own life and see everything that's going on in my own life. Can I possibly see what's going on in the rest of the world? Can I possibly see how this fits into the whole scheme of eternity? God has an eternal perspective on things. And we are so limited. We think sometimes, even though we talk about heaven and we believe in heaven, we talk and we act and we think as if this world is all there is. And we think that what happens in this world is all that matters. But it's not. It's not. Eternity is what matters the most. And we have to start thinking eternally. We have to get on God's timeline, so to speak, and see that this life, whether we live for days in some cases, a few years, 50 years, 60, 70, 80, 90, maybe we make 100. We're still waiting for 100th birthday around here. We got a couple coming close. Ed, we're waiting for your 100th birthday. We're waiting for that party. That's a blip. 100 years in the face of eternity is a blip. We've got to stop thinking in terms of our timing. Realize that God will do things in the right time. And even if we don't see God's work in this world, we will see it in eternity. We need to trust that God knows what he's doing. And his timing is always right. And that's hard sometimes. That's hard sometimes. We'll touch on that too. But we need to learn to trust God's timing. The next thing that we learn from this story is that God really uses unconventional methods to do things. God doesn't do things the way we think he should. Ever heard someone say, why doesn't God do something about all the pain and the trouble in the world? I know you've heard that. Maybe you've even thought that yourself. I don't understand it. When Donna's brother was dying this past year, we went to talk to him in the hospital. And we thought it was really important that we share the gospel with him. Because it's important to do that with everybody, but George was very special to us. And, he was very receptive to hearing us talk, but the one thing that he said he could never get over was suffering children. And in his mind, that if it was a God, and if it was a loving God, he would do something about suffering children. How could he allow that? And you can't blame him for being concerned about that, but try and understand that God's ways aren't our ways. God's thoughts aren't our thoughts. How God deals with situations, how God deals with problems is not the way we would do it. And it doesn't make sense to us sometimes, does it? We don't understand God's unusual methods. People want big, flashy miracles. When the shooter was in Las Vegas and he's shooting off all these people down below the hotel room window, and how many people did he kill? Hundreds. We want that miracle where God somehow just steps in and grabs the guy or pulls the guns out of his hands or makes them jam so that those people don't die. Or when an earthquake happens, where's God? He should be holding the earth together so it doesn't happen. And if we were God, we would do it that way, right? Because it just doesn't make sense for people to suffer. Sometimes we just think that God should just step in and just stop people from doing something. But that takes away people's freedom of choice. Now, sometimes we think that's okay. I didn't choose to get shot by a mad shooter in Las Vegas. Or it was my freedom of choice, speaking metaphorically. So why can't God do that with someone else? But the problem there is, where does God stop? Because we like to think that the problem is someone else. The problem's not me. Someone else. But if God has to step in with somebody else, God has to step in with you and me. Because the Bible tells us that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And that we are contributing to the problems of the world just as much as somebody else. Even if we don't have a gun in our hand, somehow, some way, we are making the world imperfect. Was it Groucho Marx who said he wouldn't want to belong to any club that he was a part of? Well, so it is with the world, that the world can't be perfect as long as you and I are in it. It doesn't take the really bad people to make the world bad. We're all sinners. God needs to deal with the problem that underlies all of it. So when you want to see what is God doing to deal with the problems of the world, this unconventional method, you want to see the way, it's not a big flashing miracle, it's not stepping in and stopping and changing somebody's will. You want to see what God is doing, look in the manger. Doesn't make sense. I've seen babies. How is this baby dealing with all the problems of the world? Because very simply, God knows the difference between the disease and the symptoms. And God goes after the symptoms. No, sorry. God goes after the disease. He goes after the disease. See, the world is a broken place. Until Jesus returns, we will be living in a broken world and we will have problems with it. Paul wrote about that. He says this: we know that all creation has been groaning with the pains of childbirth up to the present time. However, not only creation groans, we who have the Spirit as the first of God's gifts also groan inwardly. We groan as we eagerly wait for our adoption, the freeing of our bodies from sin. We were saved with this hope in mind. If we hope for something we already see, it's not really hope. Who hopes for what can be seen? But if we hope for what we can't see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. At the same time, the Spirit also helps us in our weakness, because we don't know how to pray for what we need. It's not a life, that's the story of our life, isn't it? But the Spirit intercedes along with our groans that cannot be expressed in words. The one who searches our hearts knows what the Spirit has in mind. The Spirit intercedes for God's people the way God wants him to. Get this, this is the one. This is the hard sometimes. We say it, but we don't always really get it. We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, those who he has called according to his plan. All things. The things we call good, the things we call bad. God works in those. Have you ever experienced anything bad in your life? Have you ever experienced anything painful? Have you ever experienced something that you wish you just didn't have to experience? If you could go back in your life in a great big eraser, you'd rub it out and be gone, and think your life would be perfect as a result? So we all have things like that. Nobody has lived a perfect life. Nobody has lived a pain-free life. There are things we wish we could blot out of our memory. But you know, the reality is that God has taken every one of those events. God has taken every one of those things, and He has used them to make you into the person that you are today. You would not be the same person. God has taken all those and He's made every one of those an opportunity for you to grow and to become stronger, to become more able to glorify Him, to become more like Jesus, to become stronger. Now, you may not have taken advantage of those opportunities, but God has given you those opportunities that have arisen out of the fact that we live in a broken world. God hasn't caused them to happen, but God wants to use them to make you to be like Jesus. Sometimes those things are hard. Sometimes those things are painful. Sometimes those are things that we wish just wouldn't happen. But God is the one who gives us the grace and the strength to get through them and to use them to make us to become like Jesus. That we can celebrate in our infirmities, we can celebrate in our hardships because we know that God is working in us. And we will be one day complete and without pain, but we will be able to glorify Him in the meantime by being here in ways that we couldn't do if life was perfect, if life was easy for us, while the world around us is going to pieces. Can we trust God? I remember that from words on a radio show I've heard years and years ago. The guy was a missionary going through some hard times. I don't remember much about this story except there were bad things happening. And the person was getting really, really defeated by everything that was going on. And he recounts how God came to him in a vision or a dream or something and asked a simple question. He says, "Can you trust me enough to thank me for what's happening, even if I never tell you why?" Those words have stuck with me for 35 years since I heard them first time. Can you trust me enough to thank me for what's going on, even if I never tell you why? That's a question for each one of us. Do we trust God enough to believe that His methods, painful or otherwise, are going to accomplish His purpose and He's going to be glorified even if we never know why? That's something to learn from the Christmas story. How is that? Think about Mary. Mary was probably no more than 14 years old. Now, 14 years old, 2,000 years ago, she was considered a woman. But she was a young woman. She was not married. She was betrothed, which had the legal standing of marriage, that if she was with another man, that was adultery, and the penalty for adultery in those days was being stoned to death. Joseph was a righteous man with a reputation. If he said, "That's my child," his reputation would have gone. But if he didn't, he would have been saying Mary committed adultery. And guess who got to throw the first stone? Joseph. They lived under the scorn of people, believing that they had cheated, that they were not righteous people. They lived with contempt. Beautifully pictured in the videos. You've got to watch the videos if you haven't seen them. And they go to Bethlehem. She's about to have a baby. She's got to travel 80 miles on a donkey all alone, without her family. She doesn't have a proper place to spend the night. Ends up in a barn, lays her baby in a manger. You imagine what they're going through their head? Did I get it wrong? Was I really just imagining this angel who came to me? Is this really God's plan? This can't be God's plan. You ever feel that way? This can't be God's plan? Because it just doesn't make sense? If God really loved me, then it would go differently. Christmas story doesn't go the way we think. The King of Kings, Lord of Lords, should be born in a stable and has to be mucked out. Should be born in a palace. But God's plans are not our plans. His ways are not our ways. And finally, we learn that God uses unlikely people. Look at Mary and Joseph. They were poor. They were nobody. They become social outcasts, in a sense, looked down upon. Look who first hears that Jesus is born. The shepherds. Shepherds were like down here on the social ladder. Nobody liked shepherds. Why not to the king? Why not to the high priest? Why not to people who are important? Why to these nobodies? And what about these magi, these wise men? They're not even Jewish. They're Gentiles. They're foreigners. What have they got to do with any of this? Kyle Idleman, who did the Christmas Experience video, said something like this, not an exact quote. It says, if God used the child of a king, people would say, look what power can do. If God used the child of a rich person, people would say, look at what money can do. But God used the child of a poor, unmarried couple, born in the backwater of an empire, who had nothing by any worldly standards, so that people could only say, look what God can do. There was nothing else. Maybe you feel like you're nobody. Maybe you feel like you've got nothing to offer. Maybe you think, I can come to church and I can ride this out, and as long as I can, make it to the end, I can do that. I really don't have much to do. God can't use someone like me. You know what? I bet Mary felt the same way. I'll bet Joseph felt the same way. I'll bet those shepherds felt the same way. Until the angel came to them and said, I got a job for you. And God does that with us too. He's got a job for you. Got a job for me. Now mine involves standing up here a lot and putting me to sleep on Sunday mornings. But God's got a place for you too. And it's not about what you can do. It's about what God can do through you. And it may be something big. It may be something little. But everything matters in the kingdom of God. Never say that God can't use you. There was a man born back in the early part of the 1800s. Very poor family. Didn't get a whole lot of education. Had to go to work. Ended up working as a pawnbroker's apprentice. Anybody think that's a reputable job? Well, we all think pawnbrokers that's just legalized robbery, isn't it? Didn't have much going for him. But he said one day, God will have all of me. All there is of William Booth. This guy who had really nothing much to offer, just himself. Well, the rest is history. And how many times throughout history have there been people who didn't seem to have very much, but they gave what they had, and God used them. Most of the time, we don't even know their stories. We've never heard their names. But we can't even begin to imagine the lives that have been changed, the people who've been saved, the way the world has been changed, simply because somebody said, "Here am I, send me." I have not much to give thee, Lord, but what I have is thine. That's what Mary said, in effect, when she said, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. Those are the words that we need to say as well. Brothers and sisters, Paul wrote, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things, and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. That's you and me. That was Mary and Joseph. That was the shepherds. That's how God uses unlikely people. God's timing is not our timing. God's methods are not our methods. God's choice of people is not our choice of people. He does it right.